Welcome to the East Central Regional Arts Council's Grant Information Session for Artists for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. During this grant info session, I will be discussing the overview of the arts funding within the state of Minnesota, as well as the arts funding in East Central Minnesota with the ECRAC, ECRAC. I'll discuss the fiscal year 2022-23 ECRAC programming and go into the specifics of about the grants available to artists. And then I will dive a little deeper into grant writing basics specific to the ECRAC applications. Unfortunately, during a recording like this, I won't be able to answer questions, but if you have any questions after you've gone through this grant info session, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I'm happy to help with questions that you may have or may have come up during this grant info session. You can contact us by phone at 320-591-7034 or via email at grantinfo@ecrac.org. That's grantinfo@ecrac.org. Minnesota's arts funding system is a unique decentralized system of 11 regional arts councils that disseminate state and other funding for local arts projects, artists, arts and education residencies, arts organizations, and other local arts activities. On the map you can see we are Region 7E. That region encompasses the counties of Chisago, Isanti, Kanabec, Mille Lacs, and Pine. If you are an artist living in one of those 5 counties, you are potentially eligible for grants with the East Central Regional Arts Council. We are partners with the Minnesota State Arts Board to serve the nonprofit arts community. On November 4th, 2008, voters approved a 25-year arts legacy for the state of Minnesota. The Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment was resoundingly passed to the state constitution, and as a result, over a 25-year period, 3/8 of 1% of the state's sales tax are dedicated as follows: 33% to the Clean Water Fund, 33% to an Outdoor Heritage Fund, 14.25% to Parks and Trails, and 19.75% to Arts and Cultural Heritage. If you're interested in learning more about where the funding is going, you can visit the website at www.legacy.leg.mn. The regional arts councils are funded through 3 funding sources. They include the McKnight Foundation, the State of Minnesota's General Fund, and the State of Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. The McKnight Foundation funds for the East Central Regional Arts Council the ECRAC Mid-Career Artist Grant and the Essential Artist Award. The State of Minnesota's General Fund funds our Arts in Our Schools Grant, Small Art Project Grant, and the Scholarship for K-12 students. And then the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, or ACHF, or Legacy Fund, funds the ACHF Organization Art Project Grant, the ACHF Individual Artist Grant, and the ACHF Resiliency Grant for artists and art organizations. A little bit of history about the East Central Regional Arts Council. In July of 1979, the East Central Regional Arts Council became a program of the East Central Regional Development Commission, or the ECRAC, in Mora, Minnesota. And in 2010, after working with a consultant and with input from constituents, the decision was made that the Arts Council would leave the ECRDC and become the new designated Regional Arts Council, an independent nonprofit. On July 1st, 2011, they moved their office to Bram, Minnesota. And again, in 2020, ECRAC moved our office to a new space in Hinckley, Minnesota. That is where we are currently located. The mission of the East Central Regional Arts Council is to support the arts and bring the life-enhancing values they afford to Region 7E residents. ECRAC accomplishes this mission through programs and special initiatives for artists and arts organizations. In other words, we are here to increase the arts. The vision statement of the East Central Regional Arts Council is that all Region 7E residents will have the opportunity to participate, appreciate, create, and invest in the arts. The values of the East Central Regional Arts Council include arts in action. We are motivated by our love of the arts to serve artists and organizations with resources, education, and commitment. We welcome all artists and organizations as partners in our common goal of developing a vibrant arts community. Integrity. We recognize all art forms and act with consistency, support, and respect in all our relationships and in our stewardship of the resources entrusted to us. Artistic merit. We uphold a high standard of artistic quality that promotes growth and development of creative knowledge, skills, and understanding. Legacy. We understand and appreciate that the arts are an essential part of our heritage and daily lives. We uphold the creative spirit from the past, in the present, and into the future. Some of the services for the East Central Regional Arts Council include providing grants to artists, arts and other nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and local units of government. We also provide technical assistance, workshops, referral services to art organizations and artists, and we coordinate the Arts Regional Needs Assessment and the subsequent arts plan for the region. The East Central Regional Arts Council board members are Pat Black of Pine County, Marianne Cleary of Isanti County, Angela Ruddy of Isanti County, Deanne Sibley of Isanti County, and Carla Vita of Mille Lacs County. We do have board member vacancies, so if you know of someone or if you yourself may be interested in becoming a board member, don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll get you the information you need to apply to become a board member. You should know all of our board members, they are advocates for the arts, but if you do happen to run into one of our board members or speak to one of our board members, just make sure you don't lobby them for your grant project that you're applying for, because that does make your application ineligible. But here are the current board members as of December 2021. Okay, let's get into the programming that's available for artists within our region. We have 5 different grants available to artists living in our region. The first one is the ECRAC Mid-Career Artist Grant. This grant is for $2,500. We have 3 grant periods per year, our grant deadlines per year. They are October 1st, February 1st, and April 1st for this Mid-Career Artist Grant, as well as for the Arts and Cultural Heritage Grant for individual artists. This grant is for $1,000, again with the October 1st, February 1st, and April 1st deadline. We also have an Essential Artist Award. This award is for $8,000. We give out 2 of these, or up to 2 of these grants per year. This one has one deadline every year of March 1st. The Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund Resiliency Grant is a new grant for us this year. This is for $600. This grant has an ongoing deadline, so you could apply potentially for this grant at any time, and you'll hear back from us fairly quickly on whether this application is approved. I'll go into a little more details just a little later on each of these grant programs, so just hang in there. We also have a scholarship for K through 12 students. This scholarship is for $500 and has one deadline a year of March 1st. Other services that we offer here at ECRAC include an Essential Arts e-newsletter. If you're not on our newsletter list, you may want to sign up. You can go to our website and there is a sign up link at the very bottom of the website page that you just click on and enter your email address. The newsletter is sent approximately every month. We don't overload your email inbox with newsletters, but it is helpful to know. We'll send them out when grant deadlines are coming up or if there's a workshop that we're hosting that you may be interested in. So it's a good newsletter to be included on. We also have the ECRAC gallery space at our location here in Hinckley. There's the gallery side and then we have an office space. So they are somewhat separate but together. We have resource information. If you go to our website, you'll find a page full of resources and links to other arts organizations within our region, also helpful arts links or resources within the state of Minnesota and beyond within more than that. The resource page, if you're curious, you can go check it out and find links to all sorts of information about the arts. We have economic development information. This can be helpful if you want to know information about how the arts are affecting your county, perhaps, or the state of Minnesota in general, or a broader spectrum than just that. We also have an arts library. We host workshops for artists and organizations. We have grant info sessions, exactly like what I'm doing right now. I can do them in person, or I've also done them via Zoom online. We have grant writing technical assistance, which is super helpful if you're applying for a grant with us. We work with you to help review your grant draft application and can give you some feedback and tips on the application that you're writing before you submit it, to let you know if there's maybe information missing or if we can't open one of the attachments that you included with your application. So grant writing technical assistance is a really great resource to use if you're writing an application with us. We have art show display equipment for rent if that's something that you may need for an art show. We host an art show every year, the annual Image Art Show. Perhaps you have already been part of this art show, or you may be interested in being a part of it in the future. Again, if you're on our newsletter list, you'll see what information about when we're taking entries for the Image Art Show and how we'll manage that in the coming years. We also have space for meetings and arts events if that's something you're in the need of. We have a library of past grant applications that have been approved. If you want to see what an application looks like and that has been approved, you're welcome to make an appointment. You can come in to our office and check out some of those past grant applications. We also host remote office hours. When we're able to, we'll go out into the region and set up a space where we can meet with artists or art organizations so that we can meet one-on-one and you don't have to travel to Hinckley to meet with us in person there. We also have referrals to other services if it's not something that we are able to help you with specifically within our organization, but we may know another organization that can help you out. We will certainly refer you to them. If you are considering writing an application with the East Central Regional Arts Council, something to think about is, do you really need or want to write a grant proposal? Just keep in mind that our grant funds are not free money and there is a lot of paperwork involved, a lot of time and effort that goes into planning your grant application for your project. There's a final report that you have to submit when you have completed a grant project with us, and that includes submitting all proofs of payment and expenses. There's the possibility of public scrutiny. I am in no way trying to discourage you from writing a grant with the East Central Regional Arts Council, but it is something to consider, and to just know that there are maybe some other funding resources that may fit better with your project. Feel free to always reach out to us and talk about a grant project that you have in mind, and we can talk about maybe what grant application might be a better fit for the project, or if it is a good fit at all, depending on grant requirements and whatnot. So some new things to note from maybe the last time you'd been part of this grant info session, or if you have applied with us in the past, these are a couple of things that have changed. The ECRAC Individual Artist Grant is now titled the ECRAC Mid-Career Artist Grant, and it has increased from $1,000 to $2,500. The ECRAC Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund Individual Artist Grant has decreased from $2,500 to $1,000. The Essential Artist Award has increased from $7,000 to $8,000. The Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund Resiliency Grant is new, and that grant is for $600. The remote office hours are available. This is something new that we've been doing. You can go to ecrac.org for updates or check out our calendar for where we may be throughout the region. The ECRAC Art Gallery space is now available to individual artists as well as organizations for meetings and arts events. The grant guidelines and the grant review criteria have been updated, so if you are applying for a grant with us, I would highly recommend reading through those grant guidelines and checking out the grant review criteria. That is going to work, it's going to really help you formulate your plan for your application when you start writing that application, to have those grant guidelines on hand. The work samples for organizations, this is something that's new that we have included in the application for organizations who apply with us. And we've also revised the budget template, so that looks a little bit different if you have applied with us in the past. We've done some updates to that budget template. If you're a new applicant with us, the budget template is something that is you have to include with your grant application, and you'll see that when you apply, and I'm actually going to talk about it in a little bit later here. I am going to get into some grant writing basics here pretty soon, but one of the first things I like to talk about is that if you apply for a grant with the East Central Regional Arts Council and you're not funded the first time you apply, I would highly recommend applying again. If you're not funded, it's not personal. Most likely the grant funding perhaps ran out, or there was something in your application that maybe there was a document that wasn't included that is required, or there is limited resources to fund projects. So the key is not to get discouraged if you're not approved the first time. Please try again and reach out to us. We are happy to give you the feedback from the reviewers and let you know exactly what they had to say about your application so that you can make those slight adjustments or additions to an application and reapply. So please don't be discouraged if you're not funded the first time around. We're happy to assist you with a second application. If you are planning on applying as an artist that lives in our region, here are some of the requirements to be an eligible applicant. You must be a permanent resident located in Region 7E, which is, again, the counties of Chisago, Isanti, Kanabec, Mille Lacs, and Pine. You must be a resident for at least 6 months. We do request proof of residency, so typically this is a copy of your driver's license or some other proof of residency. You must be applying as an individual artist. You cannot apply as a collaboration or to benefit a group or organization in your application. It does have to be for you as an artist. You must be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident alien. You do have to be 18 years of age, unless, of course, you're applying for a student scholarship, but you must be 18 years of age to apply for a grant with us. If you're applying for a grant that is funded through the McKnight Foundation, you can only receive those funds every 2 years. So, for example, if you received a McKnight-funded grant in fiscal year 20, you're eligible again to reapply in fiscal year 22, so kind of every other year. Individual artists are now allowed only one grant at a time. So if you currently have a grant with us, you can reapply for another grant once you've finished your one grant with us. Any event that you have with your project, it does have to be open to the public and accessible to the general public. So keep that in mind. Also, if you're applying for arts and cultural heritage dollars for the individual artist grant, it is requirement that you have an open to the public event. I'll go into a little bit more about that in a little bit, but you must have an open to the public event if you're applying for that $1,000 grant. Also, you must not have any unacceptable or outstanding reports to the East Central Regional Arts Council. What that means is if you've had a grant with us in the past and perhaps you never submitted your final report, you are ineligible for funding with the Regional Arts Council until you get that final report submitted to us, and it's an acceptable final report. You also cannot have any misuse of funds determination with the Minnesota State Arts Board or another regional arts council. So if you have any questions about eligibility, feel free to contact us and we can walk you through some of those eligibility requirements. So before you begin an application with us, make sure that you're an eligible applicant. Make sure you are applying for an art project. I'm actually going to show you a list of what we consider art forms here in just a sec, but just make sure you're applying for an art project. If it's helpful, make sure assemble a planning team, brainstorm different possibilities or research your project. You may want to make sure your project is planned before you apply. Visualize the possibilities of what the grant funds can do for you. Call us and find out if funds are available. Most likely, if you're applying on October 1st, which is our first deadline of the year, funding will be available. But if we are approving grants for our October 1st deadline, and then again on February 1st deadline, on April 1st, some of our funds may be depleted, and you're welcome to call and ask if we have funding available. Make sure that you, let's see, make sure you're reading the grant guidelines, like I said, and especially the section of what we cannot fund. all of our grant guidelines for each of our grant programs has a section that includes things that we're unable to fund. And if any part of your project falls under one of those categories, just know that most likely your application is going to be ineligible. So pay attention to that section. Give us a call if you have any questions about your project and how it might fit one of our applications, and we can talk about maybe how we can make the project work for the funding. Everything is online for the grant application, so you have to have a login and a password to the grant portal to begin your application. Applications are available about 4 to 6 weeks before the deadline when you log into the grant portal. Otherwise, all of the information about the grant guidelines, the grant application questions, they can be accessed on our website as well as a PDF. But to actually apply for a grant, you do need to use a grant portal and have access to a computer. What is art, and am I an artist? Occasionally this comes up, but what ECRAC considers art includes the study of a creative skill, the process of using that creative skill, the product of a creative skill, or the audience's experience with a creative skill. The Minnesota State Arts Board and Regional Arts Councils define arts very inclusively. They are activities resulting in the artistic creation or artistic performance of works of the imagination. These activities include disciplines that I'm going to show you on the next slide. Actually, I will flip over there just a second, but you want to just make sure when you're applying for a project with us that it is an art project and falls under one of these definitions of art. If we happen to say that your art project is questionable, most likely it is. So here is all of the art forms that you can apply for with the East Central Regional Arts Council. If you would like to look at this list a little bit longer, feel free to pause this video and you can look at each of these categories. You can also find this information on our website at ecrac.org. Okay, let's get into some grant writing basics that are specific to our applications. Grant application material is found at our website, ecrac.org. When you're applying for a grant with us, make sure all items on the grant application are completed and file uploads are in the correct format when you submit your application. What I mean by this is if you happen to be a user, let's say for an example that you use a Mac computer, Mac files such as pages are not compatible with the grant portal. So you want to make sure you're converting those documents to a PDF before you upload them into the application. That's going to be very important because if you upload all of your applications and they're not in the correct format and we can't open them, then the board won't be able to review your application and score it appropriately. So most likely it would be ineligible. So that's another reason to just reach out to us and take advantage of that grant technical assistance so we can let you know that all of your uploads are working properly and we can see them through the grant portal when we open up your application. What else? Know how your project fits the grant program criteria and the guidelines. For example, if you're an individual artist applying to benefit you as an individual artist and it's not meant for you to teach others. So again, if you have questions about any of this, we can go, I'm happy to talk with you more about it. But if your project is to set up classes to teach art to others, this isn't going to be a good fit for a project like that. If you are an artist looking to work with a mentor, attend a workshop, if you need supplies and materials for your art, the ideas are endless, but it does have to be a grant project that's going to benefit you personally as an artist. Make sure your application is signed. This will be very easy because in our applications online, we leave you a space where you can type in your signature. We do have all of the required questions in the application have an asterisk next to them. So you can't submit your application without completing some of these items, but you do have to include your signature. Grant reviewers, keep in mind that they can only look at your application and they can't consider any additional material that you might mention in your narrative, such as a website. So don't include that info, but make sure you are adding that information in the application if it's needed. So I guess, okay, let me just dig into this a little bit more. If you're applying for a grant, make sure your application includes absolutely everything that you want the reviewers to know about your project. So for example, if you are planning on applying for a grant to attend a workshop, you want to make sure that you're uploading information into the application about that workshop. Information about what exactly the workshop will be teaching you, who the teachers are, artistic resumes of those teachers. Everything the board would need to know about that class has to be included in the application. You can't just say, here's the website to the application or to the class that I want to take. The reviewers aren't able to click and leave your application to go look at that website. So you just want everything to be included in the application that you want them to know about your project. If you have questions, again, I'm happy to help you with that if there's any question about what we mean by this, but feel free to reach out to us if there are questions. Submitting your application on time, this seems very obvious, but it's important to note that you have until 11:59 p.m. on the day of the deadline to submit your application. So let's say you're going to apply at our February 1st grant deadline. On February 1st, you have until 11:59 p.m. to hit that submit button. I don't recommend waiting until too close to that deadline time, but you certainly can if you like to live on the edge. But also, you are welcome to submit your application at any time up to the deadline date once the application is available and open. Okay, and then in the application, like I said, there are required questions. There's also information that we require you to upload into the application. So you want to make sure that you're including all of those requested items that are required as attachments to your application. There is a way to view your entire application as a PDF, and that PDF actually tells you whether or not your attachments are if there's any errors with your attachments. It will tell you in that PDF. Again, too, this is another reason to reach out to us for grant technical assistance, because I can also check those things for you and let you know and make sure all of those required attachments are included in your application. Okay, grant start and end dates. Dates that you should keep in mind when you're planning your grant application with us. I'm going to just go over this table very briefly. There is a table in all of our grant deadlines as well with the same information. That's going to be helpful to you. If you have any questions, you can always reference the grant guidelines. But grant technical assistance, I'm just going to go through, let's pretend you are applying on October 1st deadline. So you have until September 20th to guarantee that we are able to provide technical assistance for you when you're applying for a grant. So if you want a review of your draft application, it is absolutely guaranteed if you request that review by September 20th. If after September 20th you'd still like a review, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and ask. It's very likely that we will be able to still review your application. However, the closer we get to the deadline date of October 1st, that the availability gets less and less. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us after the 20th of September, just in case we do have time and we can still help. But September 20th is that deadline date. October 1st then, of course, is the deadline when you want to submit your application. And then you'll hear from us, the final approved by December 31st, whether your application was approved. We actually invite you to the grant review so you can come and listen to the board members discuss your application and the scoring and whether or not your project is funded. You'll find out that night. But if you don't attend that, you're not required to attend the grant review, but we do send either a denial letter after that review, or we'll send out a contract for you to accept if your application was approved. You can accept the approval and the grant funding. Earliest start date is very important. Your project, when you're applying for a grant with us, if you're applying October 1st, the earliest you can start your grant project is January 15th. So keep in mind, this means spending any money on your grant project, paying for a workshop, paying for a mentor, purchasing any equipment, purchasing any supplies. All of the grant expenses can begin on January 15th. Anything spent previous to that is ineligible grant expenses, and there's a possibility you'd have to pay those grant funds back. very highly likely that you would have to pay those grant funds back. So keep in mind that there is the start date requirement when you're applying for a grant with us, and that no funding can be expended until that start date passes or on that start date. And then you have approximately a year to complete your grant project. So June 30th, 2023 would be the furthest your end date could be for your project. So start date, end date information is very important when you're planning for any project that you want to apply with us. There are some different dates for each of the grants, so you can always reference those grant guidelines to get the specific dates for start and end dates. Okay, grant amounts. Let's get into a little bit more detail about each of the grants. There is $600 available if you're applying for the Arts and Cultural Heritage Resiliency Grant. There's $1,000 available through the Arts and Cultural Heritage Individual Artist Grant. Keep in mind that this Individual Artist Grant requires an outcome evaluation and an open to the public event. Both are required. Again, the gallery space here at ECRAC is available for your public component if that's how you would like to, if you'd like to use our space for your public event. As long as it's safe to do so, you can contact us for information. We are also have been approving online grant events, which is something that's new as well, to be able to have your event online. But if you're applying for the $1,000 Arts and Cultural Heritage Grant, it does require an outcome evaluation and an open to the public event. Outcome evaluation is going to be specific to your grant project. Perhaps you are an artist applying and you'd like to have a show of your visual artwork in our gallery. Your outcome evaluation could include information about what you want to learn from your audience, perhaps. You could have a survey available for people to fill out when they're viewing your artwork. And maybe you want to find out information about how your artwork affects the people who are viewing it. Maybe you want to know what kind of emotions your artwork has evoked in them. It's going to be very specific to you as an artist, and we can certainly help you with outcome evaluation information. But there's information in the guidelines as well about outcome evaluation. Okay, and next we've got a $2,500 grant for the ECRAC Mid-Career Artist Grant, and then the $8,000 for the ECRAC Essential Artist Award. When you're applying as an individual artist, there's no requirement for you to provide a match to the grant. What I mean by that is that your full grant expenses can be the grant amount that you're requesting. But there's a possibility that your expenses will be more than what the grant funds are available. So for example, if you're applying for a mid-career artist grant and the total project expenses are $3,000, well, of course you can apply for $2,500, and then the additional $500 would be then your match towards the project, right? Something to keep in mind, again, also if you're applying for Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund grant dollars, they cannot fund any travel outside the state of Minnesota. So all of those travel expenses do have to occur within the state. If you're applying for one of our grants funded through the McKnight Foundation, those grants do allow for travel outside of the state of Minnesota. So just something else to keep in mind. Lots of information for you here. When you're applying for the grant, there is different review criteria depending on where the funding source is coming from. So if you're applying for the Arts and Cultural Heritage Resiliency Grant or the Individual Artist Grant, the review criteria includes artistic merit and quality. Now these are the items that your application is being scored on. So your application receives a number score, and the scores are based on these items. So you can receive a score for artistic merit and quality, organizational ability, community need for the project, and equity and inclusion for underrepresented. There is additional information in our grant guidelines that dives deeper into each of these criteria. So you'll want to reference that if you're curious about more of the review criteria. But the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund grant, this is the 4 review criteria. If you're applying for a grant that's funded through the McKnight Foundation, there's 3 review criteria. Your score is based on your artistic work samples that you're including with your application and the project itself in your artistic resume. If you're applying for arts and cultural heritage dollars, there is a requirement for artistic merit and a heightened artistic merit. This is explained through your narrative. Maybe you'll describe how your project's going to expand your artistic capacity or your audience's experience with your project, whoever may be participating. This is something, again, that's in the grant guidelines and goes into a little bit more detail if you have questions about this. The application itself is the first impression that grant reviewers have of your project, so you want to make sure that you're answering all of the questions that in the space provided. It can be helpful to go through and read all of the application questions before you even start working on your application and filling in the narratives. So once you know exactly where all of the information needs to go, then you can go back and start filling in those application questions so that you're not putting too much information into one question and then later on we're asking you about that information and then you're repeating yourself later in the application. So something just a tip to keep in mind. You are required to answer all of the questions that have an asterisk. You won't be able to submit your application if you have not answered one of these questions that is required. Make sure your project starts after the earliest start date allowable. As I mentioned earlier, there is an earliest start date, and all of your grant expenses and project does have to occur on or after that start date. So it includes spending any money, such as contracting with mentors or purchasing equipment. So make sure that your project, also make sure that your project ends close to an event that you might have in your project. But you want to give yourself enough time to pay for any bills or project-related expenses that may have occurred during that event. So maybe a month, give yourself a month of time after an event to choose an end date for your project. In the application, there are narrative sections where you're going to describe exactly what it is you're proposing to do for your grant. What is the impact going to be on you as an artist because of this grant project? This is where some of your research and brainstorming is going to pay off when you have your project completely planned when you apply. Again, answer all the questions thoroughly so that reviewers understand exactly what it is that you're going to be doing during your grant project. And as you're writing your narrative, consider what those grant criteria are so that you're addressing some of that information in your narrative. Describe things about how this project is going to impact you as an artist. Where do you want to be as an artist when you're done with the project? This is information that's going to be personal to you as an artist. So when you're describing in your narrative why exactly you feel this project is a good fit for you and why you want to complete this grant, that's going to actually help the reviewers understand more about you as an artist and what this project means to you. Make sure your narrative tells the same story as the budget. What I mean by this is in your budget, if you're including an equipment purchase, perhaps you're a photographer and you're going to be including the purchase of a tripod in your budget. But in your narrative, you don't mention anywhere that you're purchasing a tripod. There is a discrepancy there in what the tripod is for. Is it for your project or are you just buying a tripod? So make sure that you're including information in your narrative that matches what your expenses are in your budget. If you're applying for the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund grant, like I mentioned, the outcome evaluation is required for that project. So include expenses towards the outcome evaluation in your budget, meaning it's going to take you as an artist time to develop the outcomes, to review the feedback from your outcome evaluations from your event or your project. So including an expense for that. If you're printing surveys, that's going to cost some money for you possibly to print those surveys so they're available to your audience. So that include those expenses in your budget as well. If you're purchasing equipment for your project, which is totally okay, perhaps you're a potter and you need a new kiln. Well, purchasing a kiln is great. However, only purchasing equipment does not make an eligible art project for us. So you want to make sure you're attaching a project along with the purchase of this kiln. So perhaps part of the project is purchasing the kiln, but the actual art project is experimenting with a new clay, and you're going to use the kiln at different firing temperatures, and the result is going to be this new body of work that you want to complete with this particular, maybe you want to switch to porcelain or a different type of ceramic. So I'm not a potter, so I'm making this up as I go, but as an example, you can't only purchase equipment. You do have to have a project with the grant. So that's really all the purpose of what I mean here. So if you're purchasing equipment and it's over $500, another thing to note is that we require 3 separate price quotes to be included with your application for different places where you could purchase this equipment. You don't have to purchase the least expensive price quote, but somewhere in your narrative you need to explain why you're purchasing the piece of equipment that you are purchasing. Maybe it's because it's from a local vendor in Minnesota and you can drive there to pick it up and you don't have to pay expensive shipping costs or something like that. It can be as simple as that. So keep in mind, again, that there is a final report at the end of your grant project period. So you are reporting to us the success of your project once it's completed. You'll be reporting back to us about the financial report and how exactly the grant funds were spent. So that is something, again, to just be aware of when you apply for a grant with us. Okay, let's get into the budget for your project. Some allowable expenses that you could include in a grant project with us would be mentor costs, workshop costs, transportation, publicity for an event, rental fees if you need any, supplies and materials, printing and postage expenses, other expenses that you could list. Maybe there's royalty fees or something like that that needs to be included as a budget. That's okay. The budget and income is a double entry accounting system. So when you are working on all of the expenses for your project, your income for the project should match. So meaning if you are putting all of the expenses together for all of the costs for, let's say you're purchasing a kiln and then you're going to purchase some supplies from some clay and tools, and then maybe you're going to have some of your time to paid for in your studio time to pay you for working on the project, and all of those expenses total $2,500, then your income for the project should also be $2,500. And the income for the project at that point is going to be the grant amount, right? So your grant and your expenses, the income and the expenses for your project match. Maybe you're totaling all of your expenses and you find out that it does come to $3,000. Well, the income for the project is going to be $2,500 for the grant request, and then $500 maybe just cash on hand that you have yourself as an artist that you're going to contribute towards the project. Then your total income will be the grant request and cash on hand, which equals $3,000, which is the same as your expenses. This is what the budget template looks like when you apply for a grant with us. This is the example from the the Arts and Cultural Heritage Individual Artist Grant. We have this similar template for each of our grant applications. So you'll be completing and filling this out with breaking down all of your expenses for what the grant funds will be going towards, and then the local match amount in the center of the top table is any dollars that you'll be contributing. So I'll go back to the amount. If your total project expenses are $3,000, well, that first column will total $2,500 for the grant amount if you're applying for the mid-career artist grant. And then the $500 will be your contribution towards maybe supplies and materials. It'll go in that line item under local match. And then the total for each line item in the third column there is the total project expenses of everything for the project. And then in the income portion, again, I'll stick to the $3,000 example. Your cash on hand amount will be $500, and then you'll subtotal that as $500, which is your contribution to the grant. And then under ECRAC grant request, which is the second to the last, you'll be entering the $2,500 amount, and then your total income for the project will be $3,000. So if you have any trouble when you're working on the budget template, don't hesitate to reach out to us and we can help you work on getting this completed successfully. I've talked a little bit about the additional attachments that you'll be including with your grant application. So this is a little bit more specific of the items that you'll want to have on hand when you're putting your application together. So make sure you have a resume, artistic resume for yourself as an artist. And if you are working with a mentor or taking a class or workshop, you want to have the artistic resume then for your mentor or your workshop instructor along with your application. And this is to prove artistic merit for your project. It's a required part of the application. So if you don't have an artistic resume, feel free to reference our grant guidelines. There is a sample artistic resume there, or Google an artistic resume and you'll find plenty of examples of what an artistic resume looks like. I'll also be going into a little bit of detail of what we look for in an artistic resume on the next slides, but just keep in mind that you want an artistic resume and not a work resume for yourself. You'll also be including work samples for your art form. If you're a potter applying for my example of purchasing a kiln and creating a new body of work, you'll be including work samples of your past pottery and showing photographs of that work. If you're a painter, you'll include paintings that you've completed. You want to include recent work samples within the last 3 to 4 years. If you have older work samples, make sure you're explaining in your application why they're older. Perhaps you had to take a break for some reason and you're just getting back into your art form, but just make sure you're explaining that in your application if they are older than just a few years old. If you're taking a workshop, make sure you're including the class information. Like I said, you don't want to include a website for the reviewers because they can't leave your application to go look at a website, but they can review attached documents. So if you take a screenshot of the workshop page on the website that you would like them to see, attach that screenshot into your application or upload it as a document into the application. If that's applicable for your project. Any other supporting materials such as cost estimates for supplies and materials. If you're purchasing a list of supplies and materials, include that list of supplies as a breakdown of expenses. What I've seen applicants used in the past is, for example, if you're shopping at Dick Blick Art, and you have a shopping cart of all the supplies you're going to purchase, take a screenshot of that shopping cart and there's your supplies and materials list that includes all of the expenses for each of those supplies and materials. You could also use like an Amazon shopping cart or wherever you may be shopping for your supplies and materials. Take a screenshot of that shopping cart. You could also use just to write out a breakdown on a document by hand or maybe in an Excel spreadsheet. Just have that attached somewhere if this is part of your project to have that information included. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you're purchasing equipment, have those 3 separate price quotes included. There's space in the application for this, and anything over $500, you'll be including 3 separate quotes. But that's another supporting materials for your project that you want to include with the application. Here is some information that we look for in our artistic resume. An artist statement. Start with an artist statement that explains exactly what it is that you do as an artist. What is the involvement with your work? It can be just a few sentences. It doesn't need to be super long for your artist statement. There is actually resources through Springboard for the Arts on exactly what you can put into an artistic resume. So that may be another resource or a place to check out, but also in our guidelines, this information is there too. If you have any education or training as an artist, keep in mind this does not have to be professional art school. This can just be informal training or workshops that you may have taken or mentorships you've participated in. That can be included in your artistic resume. Any artistic employment that you may have, you can click or include on your resume. Exhibitions, performances, readings, awards, mentors you've worked with, commissions you've received, all of that can go on an artistic resume. So there is, like I said, a sample artistic resume in the grant guidelines for your reference. Going back to the work samples that you want to include in your application, there is a description list of work samples that are acceptable for your application. There is a limit to the amount of work samples that you can include with an application. And it's specific to your art form. So if you're a painter, you can submit up to 10 photos of 10 separate pieces of work. I would highly recommend not including all 10 pictures on one page. That makes your photos very small and hard to view by the reviewers. And this is just going to be helpful when you're working on it. So I would put 1 photo per page, and you can have a 10-page document that you upload into your application as an example of what you could do if you're a visual artist. If you're a writer or author, you can include up to 10 pages of written material that you can include with your application. If you're a musician, recordings, up to 6 minutes of recordings. All of this information is included in the guidelines too, so that will help you out in the application. But make sure you're including your strongest work samples first as you're listing them in the application. In general, grant reviewers aren't looking for a range of abilities. They want to look for a cohesive vision in your grant project. So if you're an artist who works in all different types of art forms and you're throwing examples of all of the different types of art that you have done, it's not going to be as strong of a work sample for your application as if you want work samples that are cohesive to what your project is that you're applying for. So if you are a painter and you're applying to 10 workshop classes, your work samples should be of your paintings, not of a different art form that you may also participate or do. So if you need any help or questions about work samples, feel free to reach out to us, but there is information in the application and in the guidelines about work samples, and just make sure it's specific to your project that you're including the work samples. And if you're following that work sample instruction list, hopefully there's no issues. After you submit your grant application to us, so that's kind of all of the grant writing tips for the application, and then after you submit your application with us, keep in mind that at that point we are unable to accept any additional updates or changes to your application. So once it's submitted, it's that's done. No more information can be added or taken away from your application. So you just want to make sure you have everything correct before you hit that submit button. Again, feel free to reach out to us if you'd like us to take a look at it before you submit it. Once you submit it, we can no longer make changes or look at your application. At that point, it is an application that's being submitted for review of approval. We do invite you to the grant review so that you can listen to the reviewers discuss your grant application. But if there is a need to make a change to your application and the deadline has not passed yet, feel free to reach out to us and we can unsubmit an application for you. That is a possibility to do. You just have to make your changes and resubmit your application before the deadline date passes. Once your application is approved, congratulations, yay, your grant project is progressing. Your application is approved. That's wonderful. So at that point, what we do is send out what we call a notification of grant award and a request for payment. And you have 45 days to sign and accept this NGA or RFP that we send you. Everything's electronic. We send it via email and you sign it electronically, and the document then is sent back to us and you get a copy for your files. Once you've signed that document, your proposal becomes part of your grant contract with us. Any changes that you may need to make for the project, which it's quite possible changes need to happen because you've applied for this project months ago before you can actually start it. So maybe prices have changed or event dates have to change, supplies and materials. There's all sorts of reasons for why your project may have to change. But if that happens, there is a process of where you can submit a change request to the board for approval for those changes. There's information on our website about how to make a change request, why we need a change request, and what exactly we look for in a change request. But all of that has to be pre-approved before you make any changes to your grant project so that we can have those approved through your contract. Once you have submitted your notification of grant award and your request for payment, we send out your grant check. We'll also meet with you for grant management training, and this training we just walk you through what to expect during the project and your final report at the end. We just give you some tips about that, what to expect if you have an event, how do you use the funding credit line for promotional materials. We walk through all of that information once your project's approved and in the grant management training. And then if you are having an event and you send out information or a press release, we just ask that you also include us in your mailing list, and so that we can get your event on our calendar as well. So, and just be sure you're using the correct funding credit line and logos and hashtags for your social media. And all of this information is in the contract. So when you receive your contract, I would recommend reading through the entire contract so you know exactly what is expected during your grant project period. In conclusion, use the correct ECRAC grant form. So when you're applying for a grant, make sure you open the right grant application that you want to apply for. All of the information can be found on our grant portal through our website at ecrac.org. Feel free to have a friend read your rough draft of your application. Contact us and we can read your rough draft for you as long as there's enough time. It doesn't guarantee funding, of course, but it certainly doesn't hurt. Remember timelines, start and end dates, deadlines, all of that information when you're writing your application. Just keep those things in mind. If you want to review past successful grant applications, they are available here in our office. You just need to call and make an appointment so that you can come in and review those past grant applications. Again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I'm happy to answer questions. Here's our contact information. My direct phone number is 320-591-7034. My email is grantinfo@ecrac.org. Our website is here. We do have a small staff, so if you feel like you're going to stop in to see us in person, just make sure you're calling ahead of time to make sure that we are available and in the office to meet with you. And that's it. Thank you so much. This activity is made possible with funds provided by the McKnight Foundation and also by the voters of Minnesota, thanks to legislative appropriations from both the General Fund and the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Thanks again, and have a great day.